My name is Carrie Lozano. I am the president and CEO of ITVS, and ITVS is the premier co-producer of independent documentary for public media. And some of you may have heard that public media was defunded this year by Congress through a legal act of Congress. And we are all recovering, but it's really appropriate to be here with the ACLU. Thank you, ACLU, and thank you, Sundance, to talk about the First Amendment, creative expression, our rights to tell stories, the stories that need to be told. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by this incredible panel today. So I don't want to mispronounce anything, so I am going to look at my notes. Right next to me, we have Julie Christeas, founder and CEO of Tandem Pictures, and producer of Run Amok, which is in the U.S. dramatic competition. It premieres on Monday, so we'll be talking about that. And then we have filmmaker and Sundance alum Carlos López Estrada, and Carlos has two shorts that his company co-produced with emerging filmmakers that will be premiering as well. And then we have Abby Cook, and Abby Cook is a staff attorney with the ACLU of Utah. And then down at the end, we have Sharon Liese, director and producer of Seized, which is in the US documentary competition. And so I'm really excited to hear from all of them about how the current political moment is impacting their work. And that could be for better, and it might present some challenges. But I want to just set a couple of frames. One is we've all seen a number of things unfold. We might have been aware of the 60 Minutes piece that was pulled at CBS, or some of the settlements that happened pretty early on last year between some of the networks and the administration. As I just said, public media was defunded, but by the way, we are still here. ITVS is still here. PBS is still alive, and I ask if you want to do something, support your local stations. They provide access to a lot of people who can't access information in other ways, so please support them. It's incredibly important that we do so right now. But we're seeing the FCC come down. We saw the Jimmy Kimmel situation happen. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what's happening in the streets of Minnesota right now. And watching people who are trying to exercise their right to protest, which is a constitutional right, and facing some serious threats as they do so, as we've all seen. And it's one of the things that's so fascinating about what's happening there is suddenly we have a shared moment as a country, because most people have seen those images now and seen what's happening on the ground, and most Americans are highly dismayed with what's happening. So again, thank you ACLU, thank you Sundance. So let's begin. So Abby, actually I want to start with you because I'm a journalist by background, and I've done a lot of teaching, and you realize we always talk about freedom of expression, free speech, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. Some of us don't actually know exactly what they are, so I'm wondering if you could just set a frame for us. What are we talking about today? What rights do we have? And then we're going to kind of get into the creative side of how that is impacting us.
Absolutely. So the right to free speech, free protest, religion, all of those things are encompassed in the Bill of Rights, which was ratified in 1791. If you remember back from civics class, this was a time when the founders of our country wanted to make sure that we were not going to be subject to the same type of prosecution from a monarch that they were subject to in England. Some of the things they were really concerned about was having an educated populace and making sure that people got access to the information that they needed to be active members in the democratic republic that they were trying to create. They also obviously wanted to make sure that they could redress their grievances with the government openly and without fear of retaliation, which obviously wasn't happening in England at the time. Originally, the Bill of Rights was only protected the individual's speech from being infringed on by the federal government, right? So a private party can't infringe on your freedom of speech. But the Supreme Court of the United States has since extended that to state and local governments. So when we sit here today, we're talking about freedom of speech. Who can infringe your freedom of speech is only government officials, federal, state, local. So what type of speech is protected? We have the classic things like we're going to talk about today, artistic expression, Basically, anything that you communicate and intend to convey a message is under the umbrella of protected speech. There are a few categories of speech that are not protected. We're talking about like obscenity, threatening another person, and there's a couple categories of these like unprotected types of speeches. It doesn't mean that the government can always regulate that speech and can make sure you can't say it. It just means that the government has a lesser burden to do so. So when we talk about things like artistic expression that we're going to be working with today, the questions we want to ask ourselves in the free speech context is, why is the government doing this? What is their intention, their goal in restricting this speech? Because if it's protected speech, like artistic expression, their reasoning has to be really good. Like, it has to be justified by data, and there has to be evidence somewhere that says that if you don't restrict this speech, someone's gonna get hurt. The second question we have to ask is the means by which the government is restricting speech narrow enough that it is really only impacting the problem that the government is trying to solve, and not broadly restricting all of the rest of us from expressing our First Amendment rights, or chilling us or causing us to self-censor ourselves because we are afraid that the government is going to come after us for those rights as well. So the big questions are, is the government restricting the speech? Is the speech the kind of protected message conveying speech that we typically consider of high value? And is the government's restriction important and narrow enough to pinpoint only the issue they're trying to address?
Thank you so much, Abby. I really appreciate it. So that's what we're talking about today. Whoops. So Sharon, your film directly addresses some of these issues, right? We're looking at a situation where a newspaper is raided by its local law enforcement. So why don't you tee up your film Seized for us, and then we'll watch the clip.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that, because doing my film, I learned a lot more about the amendments than I ever had before, and I realized that it is something we all should know. So the film is about a small town in Kansas that became thrust into the international spotlight when its local newspaper was raided by the police. And the home of the co-publisher was also raided, and the woman, who was 98 years old, died as a result of these raids. So it became national, international news very quickly, and it became an important story for me to tell.
Do you want to tee up? Can we go ahead and play the clip?
Law enforcement conducting a raid at any newspaper office that violates both state and federal law.
This is an attempt to silence the press.
You're going to be on national news tonight. You realize that? Hello.
Yeah.
I got a call from Darvin Markley, who said, your reporters are standing out the back door in the 100-degree heat, and there's cops all over everywhere.
He informed me at that time, he said, well, okay, he said, start calling the news media in Wichita.
Tell them the newspaper offices are being raided by police in Marion, Kansas.
You mean
They're down to record, too.
oh my gosh.
My mom woke up at some point in this and came out and sat behind the sofa in the living room for a while.
I'm 90-some years old and have the cops in here doing this to me.
In 98.
They took our cell phone.
I know, they took mine too. Chief Cody, this is your initiation, your request for a warrant.
Mm-hmm.
You are essentially putting us out of business.
Do you want to come inside and have a conversation with me after I read you your rights?
You're reading me where I write.
Correct. I don't want to have a conversation without it.
So, Sharon, I remember very well when this happened, because you wonder, is this going to be a pattern? Is this going to happen around the country, right? Is it the beginning of something? Talk to us about what made you take on this story and what you learned along the way. I don't want to give any spoilers out, so I'm going to let you do it.
Well, it was, when I first heard about it, it was like a canary in the coal mine story. And it seemed like, wow, this is a little, somewhat unusual, not completely unusual because people have been after the press for a long time. But I didn't realize that 2.5 years later, it was gonna be even more relevant and more important to talk about. I mean, even, was it a week ago in the Washington Post, reporter having her things seized. So when I heard about it, I thought, this isn't the typical in terms of storytelling, the stories I usually tell, because it was already in the national spotlight. So I usually tell stories that are more intimate, that have tentacles to the themes that are going on in the world. But this one was big, and I knew it was gonna be huge, and I thought, well, maybe I'm not gonna do this because there are gonna be so many filmmakers trying to get to Marion, Kansas, but I live 2 hours away from there. So the access was pretty good. And I thought, things were seized, other people can't reach them, they can't reach anyone, so I drove there. And I met with the editor, Eric Meyer, and as he was talking to various reporters, and he really knew. I mean, he is a champion of free press and just wanted to get the story out there. So we trusted each other and said, we're going to try this.
So I'm going to come back to season in a minute, but Julie, you and I spoke a week or so ago, and sometimes I think we think in the nonfiction or in the fiction world that maybe some of these issues won't crop up, but you are seeing some chilling effects from just some of the nervousness that's happening as we watch what's happening to some suppression around the country. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience is, and then tell us about your film too, Run Amok?
Sure. Well, first, thank you to Sundance and the ACLU just for making space for us all to be here together and have this conversation. And thank you for telling this story. It's really incredible. And I actually didn't know as much about it until watching the clip. So thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the narrative film space, but I'm an indie producer, and like many indie producers, we go into real communities in our country and abroad to make our work. And this year, after I made Run Amok, I went to Ohio to make another film. And we were meant to film in a university. And as the date got closer and we were calling to make plans, the university started to explain why we would no longer be welcome at that university. And the reason was that the movie that we were making had a queer protagonist, and that they were being threatened actively about their funding being taken away so severely that they didn't know if they would be able to have classes on true American history and the foundation of slavery and the role that that played in our country, to any classes that had to do with female leadership. It was really, I don't even want to say shocking, because I think the moment in America where we can see tanks in Washington, D.C., which is unprecedented and has never happened before in American history, that should be like a wake-up call for all of us that something new is happening on our soil. But to be confronted in that way as a narrative film, I mean, my producing partner and I both said, well, probably naively, you have the chance right now. You can stand up to fascism. You can do it. You can say no, and you can have us here and take our money, and and this poor guy was just like, I can't. You talked about, Abby, the need for an educated populace. And this institution is saying, well, I will lose all my funding, but simultaneously, if I take that funding, I might be beholden to a new set of rules for what I can and cannot educate our students with.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's one anecdote out of probably many that are happening. And so, Carlos, I know you and your company work with younger filmmakers, emerging filmmakers, filmmakers of color, and you have a really broad background in a lot of different forms. Tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about this moment, how you're creatives are thinking about this moment, and what are you seeing in your work?
Thanks for having me, first of all. Yeah, I'm a filmmaker myself, and I've gone to make a couple movies, but I think the work that brings the most meaning into my life is the one that I've done through my company. I started a company 3 years ago called Antigravity Academy, and it's essentially an effort to provide a support system for people who want to tell stories through film and don't have an obvious path to get there. Whether it's an economic, whether it's a cultural, whether it's not having been able to go to a prestigious film school or knowing anyone who'd open up a path. So anyway, that was like 3 years ago, and I think it's hard to feel optimistic today for all the reasons that we're here for. But the thing that sort of like I wake up in the morning and sort of like makes me feel very inspired is just to see how these communities of early career filmmakers have so much drive and so much intention to how much intention they're putting into the work they're doing. And I've gone to see it firsthand. The whole reason for making this company is so that we can incubate projects, so that we can create mentorships and fellowships and just sort of like bridge the gap between someone who's really dreaming about telling stories, personal stories, stories that are meaningful to them, and then being able to do that professionally. And we've sort of like been able to create this community that keeps growing, and it's just like so restless, and I think there's just something so magical that happens when you give an artist, some creative, someone with a dream, a little bit of support, a little bit of guidance, and you say, I want you to do the thing that you want to do, and I'm not here to put barriers on what your ideas are, and I'm not here, like, I'm just here to uplift you, and I believe that the thing that you're trying to do is meaningful, and the story that you're trying to tell has not been told before, so let me just give you any tool that I can for you to get there. And I think when someone offers you that type of belief, that type of independence, that type of support, it's just miraculous what it does. So we've just been able to see all these like early career artists that have been bringing these stories that are so inspiring, so necessary, and that's kind of the work that we're doing just every day, trying to figure out is like, we have 2 shorts in the festival here that we produced that we're so proud of. One taking place in Mexico City, the other one in a Mexican-American East Coast town. And it's just like, that's the stuff that to me is really worth waking up every day for, and I'm just excited to see how this resilience has resulted in like an extra empowered community of young people like that are wanting to change the way that the stories that we're seeing. So anyway, that's what I'm, I think, just most excited to be doing right now.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's what we're all here in, a celebration of independence. And at the same time, because you're independent, you take on risk independently too. It's it goes both ways. And so Sharon, I'm wondering, tell us about what it's been like to tell this story, because as it unfolds, obviously, the truth is always more complex than things might seem on the surface. And I could imagine that you hit some roadblocks making the film, or at least some chilling effect. Talk to us about your process in getting through this.
So when we started, and like I mentioned that Eric, the editor, was very on board with telling the story because he wanted people to know about what was going on. There was also a group of people in the town who had a lot of animosity toward the newspaper. So it was really a microcosm of what was going on in the country. So it was, we knew that we had to find out what is this animosity all about. And it really took it took a whole year at least for us to get to talk to other people. I mean, there were rumors going around in the town that that we were hired by the paper to do a documentary about Eric and about how great he was. And so there's a lot of fake news out there. And then we also, there were people who just didn't want the paper. Everyone said they believed in the First Amendment and that the paper, that reporters are important and should be able to write about whatever they want to write about, except if it had to do with them. So we really had to talk to the people in the town, and me and the producers would have to, we worked really hard to talk to the mayor first. And so we got the mayor on board with talking to us and did a very long interview. And they realized that we wanted to tell more of a panoramic view of what actually happened there. Because you can point out and say, the First Amendment was violated, the Fourth Amendment was violated, but these are people, and they have perspectives, and they have lots of strong feelings about the paper and their community. And we really had to kind of unpack all of that to be able to understand somewhat, and I don't even know if we understand fully yet, like what had happened there. So one of the major roadblocks was really getting the whole town to be able to trust that we really wanted to honor their stories and their perspectives and tell those stories.
That leads into a great question for Abby, which is, here in Utah, there's a law in the books called the Sensitive Materials Act, right? Or a Sensitive Materials Law. And the ACLU has challenged that law. Tell us a little bit about what's going on here in the state and the work that you're doing.
I want to answer that, and I want to flag just two quick things about your amazing topic. First of all is like what a world we live in that those police felt empowered to do that, and how this administration has created a culture that accepts that kind of challenge to free speech is really scary. And second, the idea that perhaps if this newspaper was maybe, even if it wasn't fringe, but whether it's disfavored or favored, that is the worst type of discrimination on free speech that we see. And if you were to bring that in front of a court, and the reasoning for the government action is because they don't like what that newspaper is saying, there is like no way that the court is going to let that stand. So sorry, that was my legal.
Though I can talk to you later about what the court did do. So maybe there are laws, and maybe there are laws that are followed.
And maybe we live in a very scary time for the First Amendment. So yeah, here in Utah we have a book ban. Not super uncommon, unfortunately, in this era. Again, thinking about how this administration has made it okay for us to challenge the type of education that our students and our young people are getting. Our law here in Utah is a little unique in that one of the worst things that it does is it allows individual districts to pull books off of their shelves, and if 3 districts pull a book off their shelf, it goes on this big list and it gets taken off every shelf in Utah, K through 12. We currently have 22 books on that list, including, I'm sure, books you're all familiar with, like Ruby Kapoor's Milk and Honey, and I'm totally blanking, sorry.
I think Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, Wicked, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I think we know where this is headed.
Yeah, Perks of Being a Wildflower, all those good ones. And so our lawsuit is essentially, it's amazing. We actually have 4 author plaintiffs and 2 student plaintiffs. And like Carlos was saying, the young people we're working with here are absolutely amazing. I mean, they are passionate and they are smart and they are so much more self-aware than I was when I was 15. But they do such a good job in the lawsuit of saying these books reflected my experiences back to me in a way that no one else has been able to do my entire life. And I need access to that type of information in order for me to be the kind of citizen that you want me to be, in order to not feel alone at the loneliest time in my life in high school. And it's a really beautiful, you all tell wonderful stories through film, and we tell these weird stories through complaints and lawsuits and stuff, but it really is a story. It's a story story of these students and these authors who have put forward their most vulnerable selves and tried to make connections for people who desperately need those connections. And, you know, Utah has a lot of influences that are unique here. Sorry. And we're trying our hardest not to let that prohibit our students and our young people's access to the information that they need to, you know, to thrive and become their own people.
May I just say one thing? I just want to jump back because earlier in our conversation, you said there was a lot of fake news, right? And I feel like this expression is also relatively new, and has changed how we collectively experience truth and venues that we are used to getting truth from. So we're collectively now in this moment of questioning, is that real? Is that real? Did they use AI? What lines am I reading between anymore to even understand? And Carlos, when you were saying like, the most meaningful thing for me is I'm sitting with this group of kids who are saying, who I get to say, you have a dream and I'm gonna help you accomplish it. And that's really like the American dream, right? Like as a person who wasn't born in this country, I grew up with the idea of America. America, you can make a life with choice. You can make a life that's not dictated by what your family did before you or what your government restricts. You can choose to dream. And so when Abby brings up high school students, it gives me a segue to talk about Run Amok briefly, because our movie is exactly about that time of life where your worldview is forming at the same time that like your body's going crazy, like dividing cellularly the most outside of being a 2-year-old, right? And these kids are struggling with a very polarizing subject matter, a subject matter where, you know, you're either right or you're wrong and there's no gray in between. And they're trying to figure out how to talk to each other and how to bring their limited worldviews to the table. And they're doing it through trying to make a musical for their school. And the adults that surround them want to be helpful, but they don't really know how to support, help, or guide because their views are so polarized. And I just think it's this really fascinating moment to live in a world where we're being told news is fake. We've defunded public channels that we've all counted on for our actual news, from like what's happening politically to the weather. Like, am I safe in my town? Like my town where I live in New Jersey is gonna get 18 inches of snow. We would normally hear that on public radio. So it's just a very interesting view to like look at this issue of free speech. Not only that freedom of speech is being challenged, but when people do speak, what are we to believe?
And who's going to stand up? I mean, to that point, and it's complicated who can and cannot stand up at different times. One of the things that we've talked about a lot as self-censorship, right? And when we first started to feel the squeeze in ITVS, it is my proud moment to say that I received a letter a year before the election from Senator Ted Cruz about our diversity work, which we proudly do to this day, and will continue to do because that is our congressional mandate. And so we'll continue to do that. But one of the things that our lawyer said to us is do not self-censor. That is a First Amendment violation. And so we haven't and we will not. But I'm wondering for all of you in the creative space, for the filmmakers, are you stopping yourself at this time? So, you know, Sharon, as you go through releasing your film, you know, how are you thinking about how to talk about it? Or do you have concerns? Are there threats? You know, how are you navigating the moment, or even thinking about the next project?
Yeah, all that. It is, yeah, it's pretty scary. I feel like we're fortunate right now as storytellers that we are still mostly able to tell the stories that we want to tell, and that we have, and that's why it's so important that we have funders and people who support us in putting our work out there, because if you believe in the power of storytelling, it's so important to be able to have these vehicles for conversation. So I think that's important, but I also think, it's hard to think about that we would be censored, and it happens where I was thinking, this is about journalism. This is one of the themes, of course, is about journalism. And there are some things that we ask questions about, like, should journalism be evolving? Should it be changing? Is maybe the old school journalism approach not working? And you do get a little anxiety over that. Journalists are going to be looking at this, and they're going to be critical of it. So yeah, there's some of that, but right at this moment, I feel somewhat hopeful, and I feel I'm really encouraged that we are able to tell the stories that we are telling right now.
Carlos, what about you?
I just feel like it's very easy to feel powerless these days, and it's very easy to just turn on the TV and just immediately just sink into a hole. And just thinking about of course it's important to think about legislation, of course it's important to think about Congress and but at the same time it's like I'm just a dude and I want to engage civically as much as I can, but sometimes I feel like looking around you and saying yes, let's keep the big picture in mind, but also what are the people close to me? How can I support my community? How can I maybe think a little bit smaller and take things at bite-sized and can I support a local film club? Do I have a couple of $1,000s that I can share with a filmmaker who wants to make a documentary about issues in our community? And all of a sudden I feel like you're empowering sort of the storytelling that is necessary, the storytelling that now has the potential to travel on social media and really stir up conversations. So at least for me personally, I find a lot of purpose in just thinking about this small community that we've been cultivating, trying to empower maybe a small handful of people, but in a way that is meaningful, in a way that they're going to be able to tell stories that are unfiltered, stories that are dealing with issues that are very pressing and very timely to their communities. And then I think also trying to surround ourselves with people who are going to allow us to bring those stories to a wider range of people, because I think that as much as it's empowering to create independently, I think the next big step is how do our independent stories reach beyond our community? How can they end up in theaters across the US? How can they really break through in a meaningful way? So I think that's the other challenge that I see, is just making sure that we have the patrons and the supporters and the people who can help us sneak our sneaky ideas onto the mainstream. So I'm personally just a little bit more immediately focused with the grassroots aspect of it and trying to work and really hopeful that we're going to be able to find the bridges to take it to the next level and to the next level and to the next level. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I tried.
You said something really important, which is something Julie and I were actually talking to. It's the role of art and artists, and we're not even talking about the joy, the hopefulness, the inspiration, being subversive. The what did you say? Sneakiness. We're really good at being sneaky. That's what art in part is for. And so, Julie, I felt like you gave when we spoke, a kind of a rousing rallying cry to the importance of storytelling in a moment like this.
Here's the thing. independent film producers, like, we live outside the studio system for a reason. I think we're all drawn to telling stories that express something about the human condition that we don't otherwise see, right? A point of view about the world, a group of humans who are going through something maybe I didn't know about before. And so you, Carlos, say it's small that, you know, one person has this idea and they get to tell the story, but the ripple effect is so much wider, and I feel like that's part of what we forget, that, you know, my actions, my work, everything from the story we're telling to how we choose to crew up. Are you crewing up in an equitable and diverse way? Are you working sustainably so the community is impacted positively by your presence? That's something that we do at Tandem Pictures that's like super important to me for that reason, because yes, you're making art, but you should do it in a way that you can walk away and feel proud of having made it in a better way too. But yes, art, I think curiosity is really the thing, right? Like, what I'm trying to do for myself right now, and with the filmmakers I'm working with too, it's like, yes, totally. You watch the news, it's like, I'm just gonna go in the bathroom and put my head in the toilet. Like, everything's terrible. Like, this is just absolutely, everything is horrible. But the truth is, it's not, because we're here together. And if I can be curious about how you think, person who does not think like me, person who does not look like me, person who has a totally different experience with your shared community, socially, financially, politically, all of it. And I can be curious to understand how perhaps your point of view has been formed. That's it. That's how we find the way, right? Like, if I am so tight in myself that what I'm saying is right, that, you know, the point of the artist is yes, okay, I'm making something for you to experience, but I'm hopefully making it to encourage our curiosity about each other, and just to be able to talk about it. What other forum do we get to sit and just ask somebody a question? Truth, like, with curiosity, really, what is your response? And maybe I understand something. It doesn't necessarily change my opinion. Maybe it does. But if it doesn't, at least I understand something different about how your humanity has been molded to make you think this way. And then what's the story? And then what's the conversation?
Can I add a little, because you just made me think about something, and I think that we tend to be so results driven, and we're so easy to deem something as unsuccessful if it, you know, why are you gonna make a short film and if it doesn't premiere at Sundance, and why are you gonna make a documentary if it doesn't get legislation changed, and what's the point, and why are you even gonna try to make a film about X because you know that it's not going to play widely because of the times that we live in, or it's gonna get censored, or why write a book that, you know, so many states are not gonna be able to share with children. Like, I think it's really easy to get trapped in that thinking, but I as you were talking, I was also just thinking about the power of creating and the power of, like, even just the drive that you're using to describe why you're making things. Like, that is also contagious, and even if you're empowering a young person to be able to tell their stories, regardless of what happens to the actual thing, seeing someone get excited to do something that is meaningful to them is contagious, and it's gonna inspire the person right next to them to do the same, and it's gonna inspire the immediate community to do the same. So I think it's I keep going down to sort of like the most basic form of influence, but I do think that it's important to just remember that the act of empowering someone, the act of supporting someone, the act of giving someone the liberty to create, that is enough to, like, really have a ripple effect. And I just, as you were talking, I think it's important to say, because we sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and we have to get over that.
Well, the thing about independence is like you can't stop us, actually. If we had any sense of reason, we would do something else in the first place. So independents are unstoppable, and that is essential right now. I want to thank all of you for being here, and you all are the future of film.